my thoughts on leadership or lack thereof. After many, many years in the corporate world, I've seen good, bad, and the ugly in terms of leadership. And we were talking last week about the leadership we see globally. Interestingly enough, I was on a virtual business lunch with the FT yesterday, and the guest speaker was Lord Finkelstein, editor of the FT, the Times Group, and very interesting thoughts on our illustrious leader, both good and bad. He's not a Boris fan by any means, but he's, with his background, he's able to be quite objective in his thoughts, and he gives him more credit than I would. But he's also very critical in other areas as well. So he says his weaknesses, probably a discussion for another day, but his weaknesses are different to ones we were discussing last week, which is quite interesting. So very interesting discussion about that generally, which is quite timely given the subject today. And it was mentioned last week that some of us, when we were in our corporate careers, were given quite a budget to do personal development. And I also did the 1-week time management international course, followed by a 3-day presentation skills course. But the one thing I never did was any leadership training. And I never really needed it because I had some really good managers who also coached me and developed me. And when I took responsibility for other people, gave me some guidance, pointed out when I was going wrong, advised, helped, supported. Some didn't, some were damn useless. But I was lucky that pretty much everybody I worked for at ICI, with one possible exception, was excellent at that. And that for me, I think, is the difference, is that we've ended up with managers, not leaders, in a lot of cases. I see, sorry, I'm referring to my notes now that I made the last few days, but I see generally an avoidance of accountability and an avoidance of decision making. And we talked about that last week. It's a hard decision. I'll put it off until I actually have to, because I know whatever I decide, I'm going to upset somebody. So I'll leave it to the last possible moment. Oops, it's a bit late. And what I would describe as landlord managers, there's too many of them around in the corporate world. And by that, I mean somebody who takes a job as new CEO, for example, and all they do is steady as she goes, don't have a vision or a plan or don't do anything that's different. So they earn a lot of money, but all they do is keep all the plates spinning. They don't actually do anything new. And I think a lot of those guys and ladies are going to be found out in the outcome of COVID, because their businesses they're going to end up with are going to be in a very different place to when they started their jobs, and they're going to have to make some of those decisions that they haven't done before. What will probably happen is some big consultancy firms will get lots of money to help them figure that out, and then help them implement it and still make them look good, but it'll cost them a fortune. And that's, I think that part of that's because there's a focus on title, stages, and rewards, rather than actually, here, let me show you what I can do and then reward me. It's about, give me the job and the title, and surely the reward that comes with that is X. And all the other thing I see a lot in corporate world, and I used to moan about this a lot, complain about this a lot when I worked for Akzo Nobel. I thought it was just an Akzo Nobel thing. But then, having been 6 years as a consultant and worked in many other businesses, it's not just an Akzo Nobel thing, it's an industry-wide thing. And that's middle managers earning quite a lot of money, but not making a decision. They kick it upstairs for the boss, and they kick it upstairs to the boss. A very good example of that is I think most people on the screen are old enough to remember the financial crash in Asia in the late 90s. My first trip to Asia to actually live in Asia was in Bangkok in '99, and there's a very interesting piece in the Bangkok Post, co-written with PwC, and sorry, I have to reject that. With PwC, and their analysis was in the run up to the crisis, there'd been a drive to get rid of the expats and bring in local managers, localize everything. The culture in Thailand in Asia generally is very hierarchical. So although you have a director of and a manager of and a leader of, at the end of the day, you run it by the president. And the president will say yes or no, or will agree or disagree, will not give permission. So even if he agrees, it's still your decision. So that's and that's how they avoid accountability. And they said one of the reasons that they ended up such a mess was because they kept passing up the line to get a decision, but the decision came too late. And it was so anyway. In the outcome of the crisis, the point of this article was many more opportunities for expats to get back in and help them, Western-style managers. So this is the start of the problem. I think the problem goes back before then. I read a piece recently that says management style changed a lot. First half of this century, first half of the last century, you had what they call the hero manager. So people are proven, and this has come out of the wars we had in the first half of the century. We had the Boer War, the First War, and then we had all this fallout in the 20s, and then we had the build up, the Second World War, and then we had the Korean War, and this hero leader concept. And then in the late 70s, you then have this management theory that, well, you need to be more than just the person who can go out and charge and follow me. You need to have technical skills. So the big focus was on technical skills. As a result of that, we ended up with very good accountants leading big financial departments, but they can't manage or lead people. The best salesman becomes a sales manager, yet he can't lead people. Now, my own personal experience with that is I was not a particularly great salesman. I was only slightly better than average, but I was one of the best sales managers that they had in terms of results and the engagement of the team and the performance of the team. So my trick was being able to lead a group of people and get better results. So because it always struck me, one of my bosses made the point that as a manager, you're accountable for them for more than you can physically do yourself. And you're not just responsible for the results, you're responsible for the people as well. So that was something I learned very early on in my career, which is very useful. Anyway, let me see, I lost my place. So why are we in this situation? It's because of this promote the technical skills. You don't need to be the best accountant to run a department. You don't need to be the best salesman to run a team of salespeople. And one of the things that we saw in the late 90s, mid 90s onwards, is actually probably started in the late 80s, but we saw the consequence in the 90s, and that's this right sizing of businesses. We heard a lot of big redundancies in the 80s. Al Dunlap was famous for taking the chainsaw to Sunbeam Group. What did he ever do after Sunbeam? He disappeared. Right place, right man, right place, right time, but nothing heard of him since. And he cut, which was fine. That's what they needed, and a lot of industries needed that. But it was the in phrase was delayering. And I remember ICI doing that. But of course, all of a sudden, then you got no middle ground. You couldn't build a path and build experience, and supervise 1 or 2, and then 4 or 5, and then 8 or 9, and then the whole department. You went from supervising nobody to supervising 10 people. And as a result, we ended up with a lot of middle managers not making decisions, being paid a lot of money, not making decisions, and reinforcing that problem I described earlier on. And then you end up with management by tick boxes. Computer says no, and I looked that up. That was that they first used that in 95 or 96. So it was obviously a recognised problem all the way back then. And this is part of the reasons why we have disasters like the Windrush scandal. You have had these people that are in the spirit of the regulations are able to stay, but because they can't tick all the boxes, the middle managers are not prepared to take a decision and say, well, I can see you meet the criteria in the spirit, but I can't tick all the boxes. Leave it with me. I'll escalate it and we'll figure it out. No, sorry, you've got to go. Nobody's prepared to make a decision. Now that's probably because they don't feel comfortable making a decision in case they make the wrong decision. There's no permission to fail. There's no permission to try, and there's no latitude. So it does sort of reinforce itself. We also saw this with the bedroom tax. When I was living in Holland, I was reading a piece in the news, and I don't know which town it was. A family with a 3-bedroom home, taking care of their disabled son who's in his 30s. They needed the spare room to keep all his equipment, but it was deemed it was only 2 bedrooms, so they lost some benefits. And the DSS, or whatever they call themselves, DWP, wouldn't listen and wouldn't agree. They got their MP involved, and he spoke directly to the minister, and well, of course, that makes sense. And an exception was granted. Now, it shouldn't take an MP's involvement and going directly to the minister to get the exception. It makes sense. It should be a case of, I've got all the facts, I can see the requirement. On this occasion, I'll grant an exception. You know, the managers are senior enough; they have the wages to be able to do that, but they don't want to take the decision because they don't feel as though they want to take the risk and have that argument with the big boss, or the environment in which they work is it will jump on you if you make a wrong decision, which is sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, and sometimes it's all of the above. You end up with this blindly following rules. Just as an aside, when we lived in Singapore and my daughter wanted to come back to the UK to university to go and be an actress, she didn't qualify for free tuition as a Brit because we've been outside the UK for 3 years. And I phoned them up and I challenged them. And I said, well, why does that rule apply? Well, it's to stop people who haven't been paying taxes and national insurance getting free education. So you haven't been here 3 years, but what about the 20 odd years I was paying tax and national insurance before I went overseas? Oh, no, but the rule is the last 3 years and you weren't here the last 3 years, so you got paid. So I met the spirit, but not the rule, and they weren't prepared to grant an exception on that basis. So we ended up paying privately. So one of the reasons I teased my daughter over her acting degree. There are lots of thoughts about what makes a good leader, and someone will say it has to be the person with the vision, has to know, communicate to everybody where they're going and what they're doing. That on its own is not very, I don't think it's enough. You have to have that. You also have to create a comfortable atmosphere, an atmosphere where people can achieve, want to achieve, but also feel as though they can try and fail. And if it does go wrong, it's not a disaster. One of my bosses always said, I don't mind you making mistakes, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. Just don't make them twice, which I think is fair. And one of the other things that I always try to do, which one of my bosses used to get quite frustrated at, because he wanted, now. I said, yeah, well, I can make the decision for my people, but then they don't learn and they'll never advance. And I used to allow them to manage their departments. So you've got to allow your managers to managers. And Finkelstein yesterday said that's one of the good things that Boris does. He does let his ministers do their job without too much interference. And sometimes he'll overrule them when he feels he has to, but generally he lets them manage, that chairman of the board approach. The list of the things he liked about Boris was a lot shorter than the list he didn't like, but that's another discussion for another day. But and I do think that that's a good thing. If you've got somebody who knows their department as across all the facts, then let them get involved with the discussion. Don't try and command it itself. Why? It's not about, the true sign of a leader is when the flak comes in, they protect their staff. And when it goes well, they compliment their staff for making it happen, or their team. So that really that's how it should be. You take the flak, but you avoid the praise, and that's really another thing I learned earlier on. And that really does work when you can put your people front and center. It exposes them. The other thing I was taught, which I thought was quite important, is I could never get promotion unless I had somebody behind me to fill my spot. So that was another incentive to develop my team. And really, that's all I wanted to say. My views on leadership and what we're missing. We'll have the discussion. I've got to reply to this phone call, so I'll step out for a second while you kick off the discussion. But we'll get to what I think we need to do differently in the future to avoid that.
Thank you very much, Barry.